everybody, and welcome to another episode of Ask a Sex Therapist. I am here today with Laurel Meese. Laurel is a licensed therapist with over a decade of experience working with high achievers, including executives, lawyers, healthcare workers, and entrepreneurs. Laurel began her career in sexual assault response, and she remains deeply passionate about supporting individuals on that journey. A voracious lover of life, she strives to empower, inform, and inspire hope in those she works with. Laurel holds an MS in counseling psychology, is trained in EMDR trauma therapy, and has worked as a graduate professor at Pepperdine University. She's the founder of Laurel Therapy Collective, where she leads a team of therapists specializing in anxiety, trauma, burnout, and couples therapy. Laurel's licensed in California, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Washington, and Florida. So welcome, Laurel. Thank you for being here.
Hi, that's a lot. that was a very long bio.
That's right. I know. I bet people send me their like paper versions, and I'm like,
I know.
It's going to sound longer.
Yeah. I also hope I'm more fun. I hope I'm more fun than my bio makes me sound.
Well, I know it's kind of interesting, like doing this work and also being public facing, because it's like it's important to I think, lead with credentials and credibility sometimes, but then also it's like we're still just people and we like to have fun too. You know? Yeah. So
well, and I know that people have probably seen the topic on, the podcast title and are kind of like, oh man, that sounds like a bummer. And my intention is actually to have this be a very
we'll make it
inspiring, hope infused, we're not going to make it a bummer. We're going to make it real, but also there's so much hope. There's so much healing and growth that can happen.
Yes.
And you can actually have better sex eventually after a traumatic experience. So,
I fully agree with you. I think, humans are incredibly resilient. That's one of my favorite parts about the work that I do, is getting to kind of, see growth and transformation. And it's also just very cool working with people who are like willing to go there and willing to do the work on topics that are painful and sensitive,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, my clients are incredibly courageous people. I admire them so much. I'm so honored to be in their lives in this role, supporting them on, the things that matter most to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a cool job.
Well, it is a very cool job, Sometimes it's interesting because I think people have so many assumptions sometimes about like what therapists or sex therapists or trauma therapy, like what it must be like, and it's not always the case.
No.
But I would love to start with, and you had mentioned, just giving people like a 101 on sexual assault and kind of like what do they even need to understand about that topic?
Yeah. So before I was a therapist, I worked in sexual assault response. I worked in a crisis center. I volunteered for RAINN.org. And, the biggest takeaway when you're going through those early trainings is that sexual assault is not about sex. It's not about sex at all. It's about power. It is about someone exerting power, taking power, and just creating a power dynamic that is acted out through a sexual act. But it's not really about sex. And when we think of it that way, it's a little easier to wrap our heads around the very normal reactions that people have to experiencing an assault. And so I feel like that's the foundation of this conversation, right? It's not about sex, it's about power.
Okay.
Now, of course, in sex, people are always experimenting with power dynamics. It just needs to be done consensually, right?
Of course. That's very different.
Yes. Very different. Like, please play with power dynamics.
Yes.
But always with consent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good distinction.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, that is interesting. And I guess, how did you kind of come to realize that? Because I do think that so many people still think sexual violence is about sex.
Yeah. I mean, it was just explicitly said in all the trainings I was doing, like the sexual assault is not about sex. It's about power.
Okay.
And, as many types of assault are, non-sexual assault, we don't think of non-sexual assault as being about someone's face or about like if they get punched in the face. Like we don't think of it.
Good point.
Yeah. Right. And so it was just really repeated over and over, like, this isn't about sex. But the impact it has is often on people's sense of their sexual self and their feelings of safety and vulnerability around sex, and what it means for their sex life going forward. And, of course, all of the socialized morality and value and purity stuff that is in the water of culture,
Yeah.
So it stirs all that up.
Can we also define, like, what counts as sexual assault?
Yeah. So I'm really careful about language. Some people really hate the R word, and not all sexual assault falls under that category. But if you had a sexual experience that left you confused or uncomfortable or feeling shaken, or like just really not sure if there was consent, that probably would fall under. Now, I could definitely see there being some very consensual situations where there was confusion, but if there wasn't kind of an explicit consent conversation, then it's the emotional reaction, feeling like, ooh, I don't know about that, because a lot of the time people are really hesitant to describe what happened to them as a sexual assault because they have a very narrow understanding of what sexual assault is. Like, oh, it's only something that happens like in the basement of a frat house or something like that. And that's really just not, that's so limited. In the same way that many people have a very limited idea of what sex is, we tend to really get too granular. So it's about the emotional response. It's not about what actually happened. When I was working in, unfortunately, it was called a rape crisis center. I wish it was called something else because that word is really activating for people. And I would do hospital accompaniments. So like going to the emergency room where they were treating someone that had experienced an assault. And a whole separate thing that there's actually like emergency rooms have specially trained response teams. They're trained in a very like as non-invasive as possible. Like, how do you help someone who is seeking medical care feel okay if they're going to get medical care. And I would kind of be with these people as an advocate. And sometimes it was for something that was, a major violent assault. And sometimes it was not something that would fall under a typical conception of what a sexual assault was. And the emotional reactions that I was seeing in that emergency room were just all across the board. Like some people that had like a really horrific, violent, very in that narrow definition of assault, they were more composed and collected than someone who, like the friend of someone that was going through a medical exam. So it really is about your internal emotional experience of it rather than like the mechanics of what happened.
That makes sense. Because sometimes I think when we go through an experience that feels traumatic, we often will like minimize it or be like, oh, well, it wasn't that bad, or it wasn't. And then we like hesitate to sort of claim the word like, oh, I was sexually assaulted, or, and I think that's some of the issue around the word rape. But I'm also curious with your insights, just since you probably have more experience with that, what do you think it is that about the word rape that triggers people?
The word rape requires anyone using it to describe their experience to kind of accept a certain level of violation and lack of consent that may be just too disturbing. Like they may know that what happened to them wasn't okay, but they don't want it to get categorized with like kind of that
like severity kind of.
Yeah, that severity. They likely know the perpetrator and don't want to associate that because most assaults are perpetrated by someone that the survivor knows. So it just feels like it adds a level of intensity when they're just like trying to get back to their baseline, like trying to like get back to normal emotional operation.
Yeah.
Right.
That makes a ton of sense. It's like, it seems like in a way the wording should be helpful or should be meant to be helpful, but I can see how the important thing is like honor your feelings. If feeling it any certain way is stressful for you, you don't need to do that. And just validate yourself.
Language is super powerful, right? And in any context, in like a really positive identity context, like language can be amazing. So I always mirror the language that whoever I'm working with is using, and if they want to use the word rape, great, I will use that word.
Right.
And if they don't, it's often people use very vague language, like that thing that happened to me.
Right.
Or my experience in college or whatever. And that is fine too.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. I think just whatever wording works for you. And I think it's interesting. And just from what I've noticed, sometimes people after having some sort of sexual violence or assault feel like, kind of back to normal, for a while. And then it could be something that doesn't come up until maybe they're in a committed relationship down the road.
Or they see a movie or TV show, or they hear about something that happened to a friend or a family member, or, there's something on the news. Like, I think sometimes we overuse the word trigger these days, but with this topic, like, no, there are very much triggers out there.
Use of the word trigger.
Even certain body sensations can be triggering.
That's interesting. I mean, do you have a sense of why it maybe doesn't come up immediately? And then like, does it come up kind of because you're ready to deal with it, or just because there's a trigger? Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So it's super normal for people to kind of just put it on back burner just because they're trying to reestablish normalcy. Super normal. And with any trauma, by the way. And then once you're kind of in a place of safety, let's say you're out of a certain relationship, or you're out of a certain environment or apartment or job or whatever, and then you have more safety. With any kind of trauma, the higher your safety, the more you're actually going to be able to deal with it. And all trauma is stored physically. The tons of research on this, but particularly a physical trauma, like a sexual trauma. So if there is a physical trigger, it's going to come up. But yeah, I really appreciate that you said, like, it doesn't always come up right away. And that's really normal.
Yeah, I hear that from people quite a bit. Because I also think it's just scary to face head on. And especially at the beginning when you're still just like shell shocked, you might not feel like you have the bandwidth to deal with it.
Totally. And some people do, but yes, generally not. Generally, there's kind of just like, okay, let's get back to normal. Let me like know that I'm okay. I can still go to class. I can still go to work. I can still hang out with my friends. Like, oh, okay, I'm still me. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Or often actually what I see is like people like feeling really confused and violated by an experience, but not conceptualizing it as an assault.
I see that a lot.
And that it's only later when someone's like, wait, what? When they're talking about it, like, yeah, that's not okay that happened. Like that was coercion, or like someone saying, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And someone being like, oh yeah, that really wasn't okay.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I think we do have this narrow definition.
Yes.
Like this is what, sexual assault looks like. And it's this like stranger and it's violent, and that's not usually what I hear either. Whether it's from friends or clients who have gone through it. But you said an important point that I want to go back to as well about trauma being stored in the body. And I would love to kind of help people understand that more. So like, what does that mean?
You asked for, my definition of what sexual assault is. And this really goes back to my definition of what all trauma is, which is
Mhm.
anything that creates a separation between the mind and the body. So, for example, let's say someone's in a car accident. I'm going to use non-sexual examples just so
Great.
we don't trigger anyone,
Sure.
right? Sorry for people that have been in a car accident.
Someone's
Let's
gonna
say,
be triggered no matter what we say.
yes, yes.
Yeah, that's okay. You can
So
turn us off.
let's say you're in a car accident
Yeah.
and like thankfully you're mostly okay, everyone in the accident, but it's still really upsetting.
Mhm.
You can be sitting in your house, not driving,
Yeah.
thinking about the car accident, and your body has a reaction.
Yes.
Like you logically know you are not in a car accident right now. You logically know you are safe, but your body's like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
That's trauma.
Yep.
It can also be anything that really negatively impacts your view of yourself or the world. So anything that makes you feel like I'm dirty, I'm bad,
Yep.
I'm unworthy, I'm not lovable, I am damaged.
Yep.
If you may logically know that you're worthy and lovable, but the belief lives in the body.
Right. That makes
So
sense.
that disconnect between
Yeah.
what you logically know is true and what your body agrees with.
Right. That fits so well with the internal family systems
Yes.
that I do too, where it's like a
Yes.
part. It's like my self energy knows, like and the logic
Yeah.
knows, but like
Yeah.
this little part feels so wounded or traumatized
Yeah.
that it's just like stuck in that energy.
Yeah.
Kind of.
And I actually think it's a big part. If it can take over your whole body,
Oh yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm an EMDR therapist, which
Cool.
is a trauma therapy that tons of, like IFS. I mean, EMDR and IFS go together like peanut butter and jelly.
Yeah.
They're great. And just again and again, I see like incredibly smart, successful people that like I logically know I'm not bad.
Right.
But this keeps coming up.
Right.
And yeah, so honestly, that's my trauma litmus test. Does your body disagree with what you logically know is true?
I love that. Okay. We're going to have to save that as a clip later. But yeah, I think that's really helpful. And I mean, I know with IFS, as you do some healing work with parts, it can actually create physical changes.
Totally.
In your body too.
Oh, yeah.
Fascinating that someone might come to like one of us for help with, a sex issue and wind up being, oh, that knot in my back is gone.
Oh, I see it all the time. Yeah. I mean, there's the number one book. If someone is feeling relatively grounded and resourced and wants to read about this trauma body connection, the number one book is Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score. Classic, but it can be dense. It can be triggering to read just because you're reading, you're like, oh yeah, I experienced that. So read it if you're in like a grounded, resourced place and you want to get a little nerdy and academic.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. So I do want to talk a little bit today about what to do when you have a partner who has gone through some kind of sexual assault, maybe is in various stages of healing. So maybe it's like, oh gosh, this just happened to them recently. They're just kind of in that stage of like, I just want to be normal and function. Or maybe they've actually started addressing it. So what are your suggestions for people in those spots?
Broad question, but I love it. Let's get into it. So, watch your language, like mirror their language about what happened to them, right? Show an openness, a willingness to talk with them about it and about your sex life in general. Always frame your responses as something happening to them, because there can be so much self-blame just in the culture. I mean, the question, what was she wearing, is not appropriate ever. Like there is nothing anyone could do that would warrant being assaulted. Nothing.
Correct.
Right. So the best response, if someone discloses, I'm so sorry that happened to you, And then being highly aware of power dynamics, right? In your relationship overall, and especially in your sex life. So there are two very common reactions in terms of like how it plays out in someone's sex life to experiencing an assault. There are some people that actually become hypersexual and they just are having all kinds of sex with, whoever they like. More power to them. It is totally in their right to do that. And it can be really empowering.
Yep.
It's often an attempt to reclaim their power, to feel in control of their body, to just say, nope, I'm going to decide that I'm going to have a whole bunch of sex and lots of really experimental sex with different partners. Completely normal and healthy reaction, as long as someone is being safe, right? Risky sex as a reaction to sexual assault, we don't want to encourage that. But if you are having tons of safer sex, right, then great. And then also there are the people that kind of shut down sexually and they don't want to engage in any sexual content or activity because it's triggering. They maybe don't want to watch sexual content. Maybe, sex scenes in movies and TV shows are triggering. So both of these are completely normal reactions to sexual assault, right? These are normal reactions to an abnormal experience.
Right.
So as a partner, being aware that either one of those is normal and okay and part of their process and perhaps not permanent, right?
I think that's a key part of it.
Yeah.
People meet someone maybe when they're hypersexual and are like, sweet, and then they do some healing work and realize that's actually not great for me, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm changing now. And then the partner's like, wait a second.
Yeah. Totally normal. If your partner is a survivor, we already talked about language, power, and control. They might want to be experimenting with power and control.
Yeah.
Don't assume they need to be handled delicately, right? They may really not want that. Now, they may need that and want that, but it needs to be a conversation. Don't make assumptions. In fact, that could really frustrate them. It's like, I told you that I had this experience and now you don't want to have the sex we used to have because you think I'm like fragile and I'm not fragile,
I love that. You're right. Like, because something happened to someone does not mean they're fragile. That's
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, if someone tells you they're fragile, believe them. Right.
Like ask questions and then listen to the answers. So it's like in that sense, it's not rocket science. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'm just a fan of perhaps over communicating around sex. If you know that someone has experienced an assault, and being willing, the same conversations that you would have about experimenting, you can have them. And trying new things and just knowing and immediately honoring any time your partner's like, whoop, too much, I gotta stop. Right. Yeah.
What about if a partner's like, how do I help them feel more comfortable? Talking about sex. What if it's like, hey, they've kind of gone that other direction and like shut down a bit. What can I do to kind of create the safe space?
Open questions, being willing to share your own vulnerabilities and lead by example. But in terms of like real practical tools, I'm sure on this show you've talked about Sensate Focus before.
Not a ton. I don't call it that way just because it's like an academic term kind of. Touch exercises. Yeah,
touch exercises. Well, so first of all, if your partner has kind of shut down sexually, I know it can be really frustrating. It can feel like an emotional disconnection. But a sexual disconnection is not the same as an emotional disconnection. I think a lot of people mistakenly conflate the two. There are couples that have an incredible emotional connection that don't have a great sex life and vice versa.
Right. And that's a lot of who I see, the people who actually do have a great friendship, do have that connection, but there's something going on that they haven't quite been able to figure out with sex.
Yeah. Intimacy it looks so many different ways. And I don't want to call out men specifically but I'm gonna for this. I see men conflating sexual and emotional intimacy a little more often than women.
And I think that makes sense because I feel like
Mm-hmm.
sex is one of the areas where men are allowed to have needs or
Yeah.
something, or it's like they're allowed to
Yeah.
identify with it
Mm-hmm.
more so than maybe just the emotional needs. So that makes
And
sense.
man, our culture has done men such a disservice
I
in
mean,
not giving them examples of like deep, meaningful friendship between men,
Mhm.
normalizing men having emotional needs. Like, I am so sorry, men, that you are in a culture where this is the case.
I do think it's shifting though. Like I'm starting
Yeah.
to see, more like podcasts and books,
Mm-hmm.
like men's groups. Like someone just
Yeah.
posted, and I'm still involved in the Chicago therapist communities. And someone was
Mm-hmm.
just like, my husband is like starting a men's group for just like men
Yeah.
having friendships and building connections. I'm like, oh my God, I
Yeah.
love this.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, sorry to women for having to live in a sexually violent culture, but we're talking about men right now. Yeah. And also want to normalize many men have experienced sexual assault and sexual abuse. So this is not just about women.
Very true. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yes.
And I think that it can even be harder for men to talk
Yes.
about it because they feel like
Absolutely.
they're supposed to be tough and strong
Yeah.
and not be victims. Whereas women, it's like we're allowed to be
Mm-hmm.
more like fragile or delicate or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
So
Men
I get that.
experience more confusion and destabilization around identity and masculinity
Yeah.
as a result of sexual assault, and may overcorrect and become
Mhm.
a little too macho and
Oh, that's interesting.
mhm,
Kind of
mhm,
like, no, I'm not the victim.
mhm. Yep.
Watch me. Yeah.
Yep.
That makes
Mhm.
sense. That makes sense to me, regardless of gender, honestly. I think there could just be sort of like a rejecting of being a
Totally.
victim. Uh,
Yeah.
which I also think there's a difference between like honoring that you had an experience of being victimized versus like
Mm.
identifying as a victim.
Yeah.
Is that something that you see with people of like
Yeah.
they get stuck in like more of a victim mindset sometimes,
Mm.
or is it not as much of an issue?
I see more victim mindset around people that uh more like childhood sexual abuse, which like
Okay.
they were a victim because
Oh
they
yeah.
were a
Yes.
kid.
Yes.
Um and or if there are repeated assaults or there's an attachment wound. uh, it's interesting. Sometimes I actually need to backtrack with people and be like, no, you were a victim of a crime here. And like,
Yes.
right. Like,
Yes.
and then they're like, oh yeah, that's why I feel so bad. And then because there's this journey from victim to survivor,
Right.
right?
That's what I'm curious about. Yeah.
Yes. And people are kind of at all different spaces on
Mhm.
that journey. And, so some people just kind of have a linear path, although not really. Not very many people do that
Yeah.
linear path. But admitting that there was a violation and
Yes.
that you experienced something traumatic.
Mhm.
Once you've admitted, then you can do that work towards being a survivor. And some of the coolest people I know are survivors.
Oh
They're
yeah.
doing amazing work. They are helping others heal,
Mhm.
and just even if you're just helping a friend or family member or something, like I promised that this wouldn't be all doom and gloom. Like you
Yeah.
actually can heal stronger.
Say more about that because that does
Yeah.
sound really good.
Yeah.
Let's all sign up for that. What does that program look like?
Yeah. When you've had a boundary or your bodily autonomy violated,
Mhm.
you can get to a place where you are just unapologetic with it. Like, no, I am not going to do that. Like that, even just like, nope, I am not going to wear that bridesmaid dress because I do
Interesting.
not like I do not like how it feels on my body.
Yeah.
Or no, I'm not going to do this like crazy work trust fall exercise. Nope. Like,
Yeah.
like,
Well, I think that's a great point, and I've experienced that to some degree,
mm-hmm,
even with my example is gonna be physical therapy. I know it sounds like random
yeah,
too, but like I tore my ACL and I went to
mm,
some like pre-surgery physical therapy thing, and she was just cranking on my
ugh,
knee, and I
yeah,
was giving her, I was like, "This is too much. This is what you have to do. This is,"
yeah,
and I was just like. I was like,
Nope.
you know what? I actually don't care if you're in a position of authority. I'm leaving because this is my body and I
Yeah.
trust what my body is saying. And so I do
Yep.
think we need to get to that point, especially as women, because we're conditioned to be so polite. You know, that it's like, what if like we care a little bit less about politeness and a little bit
Yeah.
more about honoring our body signals, you know, because our
Yeah,
bodies are very
absolutely.
smart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that example because there was a person in a position of
Yeah.
power crossing a boundary, causing pain, causing discomfort. And you were
Yep.
just like, nope, this is not for me.
Yep.
And Gina Davis, the actress, she has a book called Dying of Politeness.
Really? I didn't
Yeah.
hear about this. That
And
sounds like one I might start recommending.
yeah, it's
Okay.
the example she gives is as a kid, you know, politeness was just so it was like the only thing was being polite.
Mm-hmm.
And she has this memory of being in the back seat and her grandpa, who was quite a bit older, was driving and he kept veering into oncoming traffic.
Oh my God.
And her grandmother would just be like, a little to the left, dear. and Gina was like, we're gonna die because everyone in this car is just being polite.
Wow.
You know?
That's a wild example. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's true. It's true. Like the conditioning runs so deep that people could die because they're being polite. Like we have to be more aware.
I've been in the back of an Uber being like, I need to say something. Oh my God, I don't want to die, you know?
Yep.
Yep.
We all have. And I think it's good to like realize, like have the awareness, like you just said, in that moment of like, oh my gosh, I'm struggling to speak up and this is unsafe.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. And I also want to validate the like fawn response, you know, that it's like, if you feel like you're going to cause more danger by speaking up, that's like also
totally
good, you know?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, being in the back of an Uber is a vulnerable place.
It is.
It really is.
I don't love taking them, partially because of control issues in general. Because I'm like, oh, they might have music I don't like. They're probably going to be on a phone call. I'm like sort of audio sensitive, but yeah.
Well, I'm in LA and we have those driverless cars here, the Waymo cars.
Oh my
and
gosh.
I'm just like, would that be better? Because there isn't a stranger in the car, you know? I don't know. I haven't tried it yet.
For like a block or two just to try it.
There's actually one that like its waiting spot is right outside my house. And I'm just like, maybe.
Okay.
We'll see.
Report back if you do. I'll be curious.
Does the robot make me feel safer than the strange man? Who knows?
Okay. Well, you know, now some of the services do have where you can prioritize women drivers.
Yeah.
Which is a really nice option.
Yes.
Yeah. I love that because then you're also like supporting other women, you know, make money. So, okay, that's so interesting. And then my other question, I guess, would be for the person on the journey. I think what I'm curious about is like, what are the stages of healing kind of? Is that a thing where you're like, okay, I know I've done some healing, but I know I have more to do, but maybe I'm not even sure what to do next or what to look for.
Yeah. I'm actually not aware of any like models, like academically studied models.
You should make one.
I know. But also like it's so personal.
Yeah.
So I'm an EMDR therapist and I love EMDR. EMDR can be great for sexual trauma. But the thing is, like I see this drives me insane. I see people they're like, "Oh yeah, I just did EMDR on myself." And I'm like, "You did what?" and they got some app that has like bilateral tones or clicking or something. I'm like, that's not EMDR. Like it's so customized to the individual. And EMDR is actually way more than just the bilateral. If you don't know what I'm talking about, EMDR is a very cool, but very cool treatment.
It stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Yeah.
And it has bilateral stimulation. And I don't know if we know why it works yet, but we know that it works.
Yeah, we know it works. There's tons of research saying it works. And also, like, if you are researching it, it sounds insane. It actually looks weird, too. It's like, I'm going to move my eyes and my trauma will go away. Yeah, okay.
Right. I've done the one where you have, like, the pulsar things in your hands. You know, like, pulses your hands alternating this, like, little vibration thing.
I also do, when I do it, I can do clicks in the ears or just tapping yourself side to side. Because I'm doing all virtual. So the eye movements can be a little weird on a computer, but anyway, it looks and sounds totally insane, but but it does. Every time I'm like, well, I don't know, we'll try this, and then it works, and I'm like, yep, it worked again. This crazy thing.
I love it.
And I've been doing it for 6+ years, with half my clients, and
cool.
it still works.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I always joke that EMDR seems so simple because it's the bilateral while you're like kind of going through reminders of the trauma. And people, say like, oh, I'm just going to do EMDR on myself. And I'm like, no, like it seems simple, but it is so personalized and so complex on the inside. I mean, you're rewiring your brain. So please don't do that with an app. Like, please do that with a trained, licensed professional.
Right. As much as we all love to diagnose ourselves on TikTok these days.
Yeah.
Like, please get a trained therapist. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And, well, if you're using those apps that like the binaural beats, like go ahead, but only think about positive and relaxing things. Right. Like don't go into anything upsetting. Only like think about being on a sunny beach, think about like your favorite childhood memory of being like in your grandma's kitchen and cooking, like, think about really positive things. Go ahead and use the apps for that. That's fine. But anything remotely upsetting or tied to something upsetting, please do it with a professional.
I know.
Yeah.
That's good advice, just generally speaking. That makes sense. I mean, what do you find to be most helpful for the average person who's doing the healing work with sexual trauma?
Radical self-compassion.
Oh, I love that answer.
Yeah. And learning how to set and reinforce boundaries with anyone in their life, right? Which is part of radical self-compassion. Because if you're saying yes to everyone in your life, you're not saying yes to yourself. If you're saying yes to everyone else, you're saying no to yourself. So radical self-compassion. Now you do still have to show up at work and like for your kids, like you need to like fulfill your responsibilities.
Other important things. Yeah.
I see some people, particularly younger people, confusing radical self-compassion with like not having to be accountable. They're not the same thing.
Right.
But you come home from work, and if you don't have other responsibilities, like just do things that bring you joy. Like
that sounds so simple and so nice.
It is. and also like take care of your basic needs, like sleep, food, hygiene.
Yep. Right.
Yeah.
And it's a lot. We all have so much on our plates, I think, that even though it does sound so simple, I mean, like a lot of the people I work with, especially on the Peanut app, which is a lot of new moms, they are, like working or like with kids all day, and then like have chores, and their partner gets home and they want to do more family time. And then like someone wants to have sex with them, and they're just like, I can't even with you. And they're just like, where was that time for myself? But I do think that's where, boundaries and,
so I have two book recommendations on that topic that you just brought up, Second Shift and like the resentment that builds particularly with straight couples that have kids that are there's kind of some defaulting of domestic labor.
Yeah.
Really great book, Fair Play by Eve Rodsky, talks about this issue and actually has like a system for dealing with it. And then in terms of setting and reinforcing boundaries, which my little spiel is like, anyone can set boundaries. The magic happens in reinforcing them. Because if you set them and don't reinforce them, like don't bother.
Thing to my clients.
Yeah.
I'm like, most people are so good at setting them, but then someone will challenge your boundaries.
Yes.
I promise you. And then you're going to have to actually enforce them.
Yeah. So my favorite book for that is Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Glover Tawwab.
Love it. Yes, that one I have not read yet, but I'm going to put that on my list. And then we also have an episode with Heather Klaus, who wrote Take No Shit.
Okay. Yeah.
And that one's kind of a fun take on boundaries too. So you're right. I mean, like when we're laying out like what this process looks like, the stuff that's going to help you heal from sexual trauma,
it's so personal
stuff though that's just trying to make you a fabulous human.
Yeah.
So I can
it's whole person work.
Yeah, it really is. It's not
Yeah.
just like you sit and talk about sexual trauma all the time. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, boundaries. Oh, communication. Oh, tuning into what I really need and desire. Okay,
Yeah.
self-care. Awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. It's very inclusive, and I think it can help people realize like maybe there's not like a wrong way to approach this. I mean, like you
Yeah.
said with the self-compassion, maybe it's good enough what you're doing now, you know?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Okay,
I
well,
wanted to
go ahead.
quickly circle back to Sensate Focus
Oh
because I
yeah,
mentioned it, but then didn't talk about it.
yes.
Sensate Focus is kind of a tiered approach to dealing with a number of issues around sex, but it certainly can be a great way to ease back into physical intimacy after an assault. And so there's 4 phases. The first one is non-sexual, non-genital touching.
Mm-hmm.
And this is basically like back rubs, like stroking someone's
Yeah,
arm, like
yeah,
being physically intimate with no sexual intention.
yeah.
And you take turns,
Mm-hmm.
and both people just really, really trying to stay very much in the present moment. Like, what does it actually feel like when my partner touches my face like this?
Yeah.
Right? What does it feel like when they play with my hair?
Mm-hmm.
And can I just be present with that physical sensation?
Yeah.
And then the phases kind of get more intimate and more sexual in nature. There's also a lot of, talking about like not emphasizing orgasm as like the goal with physical intimacy, because that can put a lot of pressure on people that just kind of kills the vibe.
Yeah.
I'm sure you talk about that all the time. But it being a very intentional approach where like when you're in the first 2 phases, like the goal is just to physically, emotionally connect and even just to your own body. You can do you can do Sensate Focus with yourself.
Yes.
What does it feel?
That? I'm like,
yes.
put your hand and notice put yourself in like the receiving hand and then put yourself in like the touching hand, and like, notice that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you like? Different textures, different lotions, like being in dialogue with your own body.
Yeah.
And then when you feel comfortable, bringing a partner into that.
Yes. And often if there's like been some built up resentment or betrayal, I will start with like someone just experimenting with self-touch. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you can Google Sensate Focus and it'll give you all the details.
Yeah.
Nice. But that's a good tool to have.
It is. Well, thank you for all of this like value you've been sharing today. If people are curious to find out more about you or follow you on social or work with you, like what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, it's pretty easy to find me. laureltherapy.net is our website.
Nice.
I have a couple of other therapists in my practice, and actually one that does have a certificate in sex therapy.
Cool.
So if someone's in California, you can reach out to us. We have clinicians that can serve California, Florida, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Washington.
Nice.
Yeah, we love working with high achievers, and we do a lot of trauma work. We also have an Instagram, Laurel Therapy Collective. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Facebook. It's easy to find us.
Cool. Yeah, we'll link to your website, and I'm assuming all your socials are also on the website. So we'll link there, and then if people, your website's lovely, by the way. I took a look.
Thank you.
You
know what? I do have a free offer that we have a trauma-informed yoga class that is just on demand, and so you can find it on our YouTube channel, or I think it might be linked through the website. You might have to give us your email address, but it's just an hour long. There's a little mindfulness exercise at the beginning and the end. And then we have this fabulous yoga teacher that you can do it on your own. But, that's a great way to get in touch with your body after a trauma. So, that trauma-informed yoga course.
We'll get that specific link for you, and we'll put it in the show notes. So thank you so much for being here. This has been a really awesome discussion. Thank you everybody for listening. And, just remember, if you're on this trauma healing journey for yourself or with a friend or partner, that it's a step-by-step thing and you're moving in the right direction. So good job.
Absolutely. Radical self-compassion.
That's right. All right. Thanks, Laurel. Thanks everybody. We'll catch you next week.